have been a great way to connect with other writers, particularly women writers. And it was selected as an editor's pick by Story Circle Network, which is one of the largest online women's networks in the country. So that was a real thrill for me. Excuse me?
The mic,
is it on? Can you hear me?
Let's see if I can make it louder.
Is that all right?
Here, try it now. See if it,
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
that's better. I guess you have to keep it close.
Okay, sorry.
Let me just try that.
All right, I'm going to read, this is toward the end of the book, about one of the many men I met in my life in the world of being a newly single woman. This is chapter 33. "So how are you?" Paul asked. He slouched into a bar stool next to me. His yellow necktie was rakishly loosened over an expensively tailored white shirt. I felt my pulse change. Paul had dark eyes and dark hair. I felt his treacherous intimacy, but wolves compel us to look, even men who are wolves. It was Friday night after work. The Inquirer had a news bureau in Westchester. The county seat, Westchester, attracted art galleries and antique stores, gelato, and coffee shops. It also offered a decent sampling of bars. I had come to Vincent's to meet a girlfriend, but she called and canceled. That's when Paul walked in and took a seat next to me. I looked at Paul holding a tumbler of bourbon. Lights flickered across the bar. His face was cast in shadow. I had never understood his rude outbursts at school board meetings where he was the lone Democrat on the board among a cabal of Republicans. I had to admit he made good copy. He instigated shouting matches with the board's conservative Christians. Never one to shun the limelight, Paul became one of my sources. After I finished interviewing him, Paul, a lawyer, would veer off into his life story. We were off the record and he went on about whatever was irritating him that day. Once we talked about my being a widow. Paul told me he was 12 years old when his father died. His mother remarried within 9 months. From what I gathered from Paul, she was financially well off and didn't really need to remarry at all. It was inappropriate how little time she waited. She never cared about anyone but herself, I remember him saying. Now he signaled the bartender for a bourbon. Linda and I are divorced, he said. I went to the office on a Saturday. I came home around lunch and saw the U-Haul. My wife was moving out of our house and taking the furniture and my daughter to her mother's house. Oh, Paul, I'm sorry. But I wasn't feeling sorry. The encounter had just become more intoxicating. Paul was smart. I was attracted to him. Paul peered into the bottom of his bourbon glass. He stirred the amber liquid with the plastic straw. You know, I used to work for a larger, more prestigious firm, but office politics got in the way. Our knees were intimately pressed together. Denise said chemistry, like love, was a mystery. I remembered John's long eyelashes, the shape of his hands on the steering wheel. I couldn't get enough of his touch, his smell, his body moving into mine. How easy it was when with a man you felt attracted to, rather than someone like Mac, the overweight airline pilot who was angry at women, or Phil, who had no plan other than to hang out in a trailer home in New Mexico. Then there was Ross. Days would go by when we didn't talk. The trophy girl I had been as the Philadelphia Inquirer reporter had faded for him, and the sexual excitement was abating for me. Orange chili pepper-shaped lights and a blinking red plastic martini glass strung over the bar brought me back to the present. Paul pulled his bar stool closer. He told me he met his ex-wife Linda when he was 28 years old. Why did you marry her? I asked. Well, she didn't have much to say for herself. She was a ditz, he laughed. She had auburn hair. Wait, I get it. She was short, too, like me. I was almost 30, and it was time. Ah, yes, the rite of passage. I can see that, I said. Yeah, he agreed. Now look where it's gotten me. His secretary had unexpectedly quit the week before. His law firm was running in the red. Linda, at the age of 43, was dating her 29-year-old lab assistant. She's an idiot, he said. I was thinking she was getting sex, and he wasn't. He was so close I could smell him, the alcohol, the famous whiff of male sweat. You know, I find you very attractive, Paul said. I'd watch you at school board meetings, and I'd think to myself, there's the kind of woman I need, strong, intelligent, and independent. I've watched you walking down the streets here in town and think the same thing. You seem so confident, like you know who you are, and you're doing a hell of a job raising your boys on your own. This man was truly a contradiction. He was rude and arrogant and self-centered, but he is me. How I had carried myself. I watched him too. I could sense he walked into the room at school board meetings. I would pretend to casually look up from my notebook. Sometimes our eyes met. I blushed when I felt him staring at me. If only Paul knew how scared I was. Scared I would make a mistake raising my sons. Scared of being alone. You put up a good act, John once said to me, but I know you are not as tough and confident as you want people to think. John, of course, had been right. John knew me. Love is a long, close scrutiny. Paul leaned over closer to me. His leg moved into mine. Then he started kissing me, sensually near the corner of my mouth, his lips traveling along the side of my face and back to my mouth. He was rubbing my arm. My hand reached for his. I loved his touch. My skin felt hot as we sat there in the dimly lit bar. Paul was asking me if I liked to ride. He owned a horse, although he was thinking of selling it. The upkeep was becoming more than he could afford. Fox hunting was his passion. He was teaching his daughter to ride. Riding was a prerequisite for the wealthy, the horses said. The bells should have gone off then, the red flags that Paul was into money and social climbing. I was a reporter, a lowly person on the social totem pole, relatively speaking. I know horses, Paul whispered. You are like a thoroughbred. I hoped he meant it, but my reporter's brain kicked in, suspecting he was reeling me in for the kill. Still, what harm was there in kissing him? I was so lonely that a little pain didn't seem like too high a price. Paul paid for our drinks. Most of the streets were deserted now. I shivered and grabbed his arms as a bitter February wind kicked up on High Street. The Inquirer parking lot was a few streets away from Paul's run-down little office. I had walked past it many times, the small brown and green sign, Paul C. Larson, Esquire, leaning up against the dirty windowsill in the old brick row house next to a florist's. His lonely little office spoke of desperation and a man hanging onto the coattails of a wealthy mother who had never shown him tenderness. There was poverty, then there was poverty. We got in the front seat of my Pathfinder. I turned on the ignition and cranked up the heater. I like you, I said. I like that you're a rebel. You say what you want at school board meetings and don't care what people think. So, you like me, he repeated with a teasing grin. I'm warning you, I can be a real bastard. This I knew. He started kissing me again. Let's go over to my office. I have a couch in there. His invitation was hardly surprising. He was drunk, but it was his way. The outbursts, the snide comments he made at school board meetings, the shouting at those who disagreed with him. He was rude. I let him sit there and touch me. I wondered if it had been another woman sitting at the bar instead of me, if he had picked her up. I had been so willing and attracted to him, it was almost embarrassing. His bait was juicy. I sucked it up like a needy sponge. You've had a lot to drink. Why don't I drive you home, I said, regaining the upper hand. He insisted he was fine. I searched his face. In the dim light of the parking lot, all I could see was the shadow of his mouth and his dark-rimmed glasses. I feel sick, Paul announced. Suddenly he opened the passenger side door and leaned his head out over the parking lot. Nothing happened. Paul's urge to vomit passed, but his desire did not. Sex would be nice, he said, picking up right where he left off. He was leaning against me, his hand groping me. It would feel so good, wouldn't it? Come on, let's go back to my office. He leaned toward me again. Like a passenger on the Titanic, I refused to accept that the ship was going down. I just wanted to believe we could set sail together, the lawyer and the reporter, living a passionate and rewarding life. Will you call me tomorrow? It's Saturday. We could go out, I said, touching his arm. We could have a date, a real date. Call you tomorrow? Why would I call you tomorrow? It was said with nasty nonchalance. I had heard him use the same tone with school board members he disrespected. I felt the chill of his rejection. We had hit the iceberg. I pushed against him. Paul opened the car door. The light came on. He looked at me one last time and then let himself out of my car, his black trench coat flopping around his knees, a sad little boy in a man's outfit. My would-be prince staggered off into the darkness of another cold Westchester night. I moved the car out of park and started the drive home. The highway seemed to lead nowhere. Even the houses were dark. Prince Charming isn't supposed to die, I thought. I was supposed to be happy now in my fairy kingdom, not here sorting through more duds. Never believed the fairy tale, just learned from it. I wasn't a princess in a tower, and Paul McCartney or Paul Larson wasn't going to rescue me.